Hey everybody, this is John with Think Culture, and it's been a while. For the next month, about a month, I'll be really busy. I've been really busy, but eventually I'll get into the groove of uploading regularly. However, I wanted to make a special appearance to talk about the Jordan Peterson Slavoj Zizek debate that just took place. It was great. I watched it. If you haven't watched it, you should watch it. And I've noticed that all of the sort of commentariat are wrong. They're totally getting it wrong. And they're getting it wrong for some important reasons, I think. For like people talk about, I thought the framing of the debate was bad to begin with. I don't think that Zizek should be representing Marxism, for example. He's not exactly an orthodox Marxist. He's unusual, as came out in the debate. And Jordan Peterson isn't exactly, a Milton Friedman type, on the other hand, either. And Jordan Peterson's criticisms are not leveled at Marxism or orthodox Marxism, which Zizek doesn't subscribe to. So I thought that it was sort of a strange framing of the debate to begin with, but I hoped that they would move into a discussion of issues that are more pertinent to their actual disagreement which I've addressed in the past, sort of, by the way, in other videos. Like people have been saying that I didn't like either of the two first speeches, really. People have been complaining that Jordan Peterson's first speech was basically about the Communist Manifesto. People have been saying, oh my God, that's all he read? All he read's the Communist Manifesto? First of all, and they're like this, and he's never read it before, and he's constantly complaining about Marxism. First of all, no, he's not complaining about Marxism all the time. And these same people will turn around, by the way, and say, and aha, Marxism has nothing to do with what he attacks all the time. Yeah, he's attacking postmodern Neo Marxism, right? Which is a term that I've discussed in previous videos before and tried to explain what he means. So first of all, you can't say both those things. They contradict one another. But they're also wrong. He said clearly that he reread the Communist Manifesto for the debate, and this was apparently subsequent to trying to address Slavoj Zizek on his own merits, reading his books. He decided that given the context of the debate and everything, it made sense to go ahead and do it with Communist Manifesto instead. So he specifically addresses the Communist Manifesto. People have complained about this because for a lot of reasons. Zizek, for example, he's not an orthodox Marxist. He doesn't really subscribe to. Marx is very complex. He's written a lot of different things. These people acting like because Jordan Peterson's not familiar with the 18th Brumaire, he's a retard or something, that's ridiculous. And I guarantee that none of these people, the Marxist corpus is huge, okay? And again, Jordan Peterson is mostly addressing Marxism in terms of how it animates contemporary political discourse. And how does it animate contemporary political discourse? Is contemporary political discourse specifically the kind of political correctness, SJWism, progressives on college campuses and in academia and stuff like that? Are they primarily influenced by the 18th Brumaire or Das Kapital even? No. Are they highly influenced by the kind of polemical or revolutionary Marx that we get in the Communist Manifesto? I would argue that the latter is certainly true. Okay, so it makes sense for Jordan Peterson to be addressing his critique specifically to the most revolutionary, emancipatory, polemical version of Marx. Okay, the most overtly communistic, idealistic version of Marx that we get basically in the whole corpus. That makes sense. It's not an absurd thing for him to be doing. On that count, I thought he did, sort of decently. It wasn't exactly an academic paper on it or whatever. It was addressed to, again, actual people who are on the ground dealing with these issues, who are in university, etc., and so who might be seduced by a certain version of Marxism. Zizek, his speech, the two first speeches had nothing to do with each other. essentially. And Zizek's, he's complex. I don't know. Both of these people I like, and I'm influenced by. I've been heavily influenced by Zizek and my own thinking, but I think he's wrong. And I want to show a little bit of a clip. This isn't going to be a very long thing, this video. So I'm just going to show a clip from the debate that I think makes clear. People are saying that Zizek killed him. Okay, that's mostly what I see in the, commentariat sphere around this event. And I think that they're completely wrong. It was very amicable. I liked that. Jordan Peterson clearly has a lot of respect for Slavoj Zizek, as I think he should. Slavoj Zizek seemed to almost be more in kind of a grandfatherly advice-giving mode. It wasn't, it wasn't remotely hostile. Another thing that's really funny to me is a lot of these people who again are like, Jordan Peterson doesn't know anything, he's an idiot, Zizek won. These are exactly the kind of people, for the most part, that Zizek was at pains throughout the event to totally disavow. He does not like you. He hates you. He's against your brand of progressivism. He's against your identity politics. He's against your reductive. He ends the debate by saying, you don't have to be politically correct. Please, please, if you're on the left, don't be the kinds of people that are screaming in the background that I'm complaining about during the event and telling them to shut up, and then they don't. But yeah, he doesn't like you. But it was it was very amicable. I imagine both of them going out afterwards and getting a drink or something like that. But I think even if we look at it in terms of who won, which I think they mostly agree on the issues that were being discussed. But if we looked at who won, I think there's a pivotal point in this debate, a pivotal question that's asked, a point, an objection that is raised by Jordan Peterson, which receives no answer by Slavoj Zizek, no real answer. I answered it, by the way, in a former video of mine, the first one I did on Jordan Peterson and postmodernism. You should check that out if you haven't. It's pretty theory heavy, but I'm specifically addressing the question of this term that Jordan Peterson uses of postmodern Neo Marxism, which is, I think, essentially the same thing as cultural Marxism, but he uses the idea of postmodern Neo Marxism in order to distance himself from the sort of conspiracy theory articulated version of the concept of cultural Marxism that you get, I think, starting with Lind or something, Anders Breivik, crazy people. So I think that's why he uses the term postmodern neo-Marxism. Really, he's talking about cultural Marxism, and it's not. Zizek is at pains to say, okay, Marxism has nothing to do with these people. I agree with you. Your criticism of this particular ideology, which is dominant, especially in the universities, I agree with you about that criticism, but please, it has nothing to do with Marx. But basically, he's wrong. He's just wrong. And Jordan Peterson points it out here. He makes the connection, and Zizek, turns away. But you can see it even in Marx. As I discussed in my previous video, Marx talks about ideology and false consciousness, right? Because bourgeois ideology manifests itself, the superstructure, the ideological superstructure of society is a reflection of property relations, of material relations of production. And so, as he says, the dominant ideas at any given point are going to be the ideas of the dominant class. He's referring to bourgeois ideology. And he talks about, so this gets taken up later by the Frankfurt School, and they write things, like the culture industry. And then you get people like Gramsci, right, who are talking about cultural hegemony and the long march through the institutions. It's painfully clear. Basically, they're informed by a kind of Weberian critique of Marx, and so they expand out. They're like, why did Marxism fail? Jordan Peterson says this about them, and Why did Marxism become totalitarianism? And why did it become Stalinism? Some Marxists like to phrase this as a kind of as a kind of right-wing, version of Marxism or something. I think that's stupid. But so, and they're asking this. Their answer to that is ideology and false consciousness. So they take up this particular component in Marx with this Weberian analysis that you get in things like Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, in which he shows that things like religion that are a part of the superstructure can actually inform the base. So the development of capitalism is influenced by religion, by Protestantism, by the Protestant Reformation, specifically Calvinism, according to him. And this has been empirically verified, but by the way, so you can look at parts of Germany, for example, that were Protestant, parts that were Catholic, and the Protestant parts, have more money. More money is concentrated there now. They did recently a study in the Philippines. I don't remember what. I heard about it on I don't know what the podcast was. London School of Economics, maybe. And they were talking about how in the Philippines they did a study on this where they would go and basically proselytize. And so they would convert, I think, Catholic communities to Protestant communities or something like that. And the people who had been brought into the Protestant fold then made more money. But anyway, the analysis stands on its own. You don't need this kind of thing. But in any case, so Weber says that superstructure can influence the base. He's talking about, ideology. The possibility that ideology can influence the base. So these guys in the Frankfurt School, they address their critique at ideology and false consciousness, about the construction of false needs and things like that, about the culture industry. Gramsci then goes on and talks about things, he talks about cultural hegemony, which is, again, still addressing itself to ideology. What they do is they don't reject Marx. They expand the Marxist analysis. They stop being material determinists. Okay, they expand the analysis. They say that the economic substrate, the base, is not one-to-one determinant. You can't just change property relations and then expect the eternal fascism, as Umberto Eco says, to go away. And you get like in Marcuse this idea of the great refusal, that you're just going to oppose the given order with an indefinite indefinite no forever. In Derrida, Spectres of Marx, which again, Jordan Peterson's always talking about Derrida. He says that there's a version of Marx that he'll never be able to give up, and it's Messianic Marx, which is to say, it's precisely this kind of revolutionary, emancipatory attitude and disposition to the given order that we find in Communist Manifesto, which is again why it makes sense that Jordan Peterson's talking about this. Anyway, before this gets too long, I want to show the clip, and I think that it makes this totally clear that not only did Jordan Peterson not get crushed in this debate, but on the crucial question, of whether the culturally hegemonic ideology, that we see on college campuses, it's not just in college campuses. That's why it's in things like the Gillette ad, for example. It's a money-making machine. It's why it's in Captain Marvel. It's all this stuff, right? At least superficially, they have to pander in the form of this kind of ideology because it's what's dominant. That's where all the money is. That's where all the clicks is. Whatever. So the crucial question for them is whether there is some relationship between Marx and this, right? I say that there is, and again, watch my previous video. I talk about it a lot more extensively. But Jordan Peterson brings this up, and he challenges Zizek on this point, and Zizek's response is bad. He does not really respond to it. He says, I can't believe you would bring up Foucault, because Foucault was basically against Marx. He was kind of anti-communist. Okay, first of all, he started out as a communist. He was involved in communist political movements, right? So and the movement away from that, he realizes the problems with it and tries to nuance these ideas. He ceases to be a historical materialist, a dialectical materialist. He gives that up. Castoriadis eventually gives that up. It gets given up, and it gets nuanced. It gets informed by Weber. It turns into more of a cultural analysis. It becomes cultural Marxism, right? And then, even people like Douglas Kellner, right? Third generation Frankfurt scholar, he talks about cultural Marxism. He's written stuff with the title Cultural Marxism in it. It's Zizek can claim all day that Marxism has nothing to do with this stuff, but he's on this point, he's wrong. Even though I have tremendous respect for Slavoj Zizek, and he's influenced me a lot. Anyway, I'm just gonna play the clip, and then be out, since I've already sort of explained it. But this is the key. This is the absolute. It's the key of the debate, and it shows you pretty clearly why. Not only did Slavoj Zizek not crush Jordan Peterson, who's an idiot and doesn't know anything about Marxism or whatever, but if we are to say that somebody won, I think this particular point is the key to the whole debate, and Jordan wins. If we're going to say something like that. So I'll play it here and then be gone. Thanks for joining for another episode of Think Culture. I'm John. Remember, don't react, but think. I'll be a lot more regular after about a month. Just got a lot going on. Here's the clip.
Well, yeah, your question seemed to me to focus more on the peculiar relationship that I've noticed and that people have disputed between postmodernism and neo-Marxism. And I see the connection between the postmodernist types and the Marxists as a sleight of hand that replaced the notion of the oppression of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie as the oppression by one identity group by another.
Totally agree with you.
Okay, so now look, we could
but
have
that's precisely a non-Marxist gesture par excellence.
Well, I guess that's where we might have a dispute, because I think what happened, especially in France in the 1960s, is as the radical Marxist postmodern types like Derrida and Foucault realized that they were losing the moral battle, especially after the information came out of the Soviet Union in the manner that it came out, that the whole bloody Stalinist, the whole Stalinist catastrophe, along with the entire Maoist catastrophe, that they didn't really have a leg to stand on. And instead of revising their notion that human history, and this is a Marxist notion, should be regarded as the eternal class struggle between the economically deprived and the oppressors, they just recast it and said, well, it's not based on economics, it's based on identity, but it's still fundamentally oppressor against oppressed. And to me, that meant that they smuggled the fundamental narrative of Marxism and many of its goals back into the argument without ever admitting that they did so. Now, I've been criticized, for this supposition, because people who are postmodernists say, look, one of the hallmarks of postmodernism is skepticism of meta-narratives. It's like, I know that perfectly well. And I also know that Marxism is a meta-narrative, and so you shouldn't be able to be a postmodernist and a Marxist. But I still see the union of those two things in the insistence that the appropriate way to look at the world is to view it as the battleground between groups defined by a particular between individuals defined by a particular group identity, so that the group identity becomes paramount, and then the proper reading is always oppressor versus oppressed. With a secondary insistence that's very similar to Marx's insistence upon the moral superiority of the proletariat, that the oppressors are by definition, because they're oppressed, morally superior. And there's the call for perhaps not revolutionary change, although that comes up above, but change in the structure so that that oppression disappears, so that a certain form of equality comes about. Now, you argued that Marx wasn't a believer in equality of outcome, and I'm not so sure about that, because his notion of the eventual utopia that would constitute genuine communism was a place where all class divisions were eradicated.
But
and so there's at least,
hierarchies.
well, there's at least an implication that the most important of the hierarchies had disappeared. And so maybe he had enough sophistication to talk about other forms of hierarchies, but if that's the case, then I can't imagine why he thought that the utopia that would emerge as a consequence of the elimination of economic hierarchies would be a utopia. Because if there were other forms of hierarchies that still existed, people would be just as contentious about them as they are now. Like we have hierarchies of attractiveness, for example, that have nothing to do with economics or very little to do with economics, and there's no shortage of contention around that or any other form of ability. And so that's why I associate the social justice types who are basically postmodernist with they're postmodernist with Marxism. It's the insistence that you view the world through the narrative of oppressed versus oppressor. And I think it's a catastrophe. I think it's a catastrophe. And you appear to think that it's a catastrophe as well.
Just one sentence, and then you can reply. It's so strange that you mention, for example, somebody like Foucault, who, for me, I remember that his main target was Marxism. Okay, for him represented his game was never a radical change, and this is what I don't like in this, what you call postmodern, let's not call them Marxists, but revolutionaries. It's this enjoying your own self-marginalization. The good thing is to be on the margin, you know, like not in the center and so on and so on. It almost made me nostalgic for old communists who at least had the honesty to say, no, we don't enjoy our marginal position. We want to do something central power. I find so disgusting.
It's no wonder you don't get invited to lots of places.
Yeah. No, you know, Foucault for me embodies this logic of revolution, and by revolution he meant any social change, serious, that small resistances and so on, small marginal places of resistance and so on and so on. So, okay, but let's maybe drop it here.